good movies.
Halloween.
Let's mute all, and Fern will select the first speaker.
It's supposed to be a
Okay, everybody mute yourself, and if you want to speak, just raise your hand. Roz, did you want to
Roz.
speak?
Yeah.
Oh, but I think it's because Halloween is approaching, and it's just this is just right, very simple.
Thank you.
Well, that's true. You know, the kids dress up as monsters, and they're just adorable. So it's like
but
surfaces are not important, you know. And
I was scared.
good observation. Anybody else have an idea? I don't know. To me, this I saw this once and was knocked out by it, and I saw it a month ago or 2 months ago, and I said, "Wow, I could really program this." This deals with grief so well, and childhood grief, and childhood self-awareness. You know, for those of us who are parents, I just thought this was a masterful understanding of what this kid needed to do to get through where he was stuck. And he wasn't stuck because he was a bad kid or stupid. He was stuck because all the adults in his life kept saying she's going to get better. And he knew inside, even before he could verbalize it, that it wasn't going to get better. And because they denied his feelings, trying to protect him, you have to add that, it twisted him up inside. He couldn't defend himself with the bullies. He was so stuck that he needed to invent this character. And we don't know. I mean, the tree is as big a surprise to us, I think, as it was to him until, you know, it's this private conversation. And, you know, at first I called this film magical realism, like Marquez' 1,000 Years of Solitude and the other books, and the quality of cinema that's magical realism. But to me, this is the most magical because the mythology, the physical impossibilities are what we see. But the boy's reacting to it not because he knows it's a story or a myth. He really sees it. So it's magical to us, but realistic to him. So in the interface or in the difference, you know, we see so deeply into his reactions because we see the distance he is from reality, but the necessity of his dreams, his nightmare. And look, we all dream, and very seldom do we have creatures come to us in our dreams that heal us. And this is kind of what I think the film is about. Can't save mom, but we can save the boy.
Jim,
And it's
why,
yeah.
I'm sorry, why do you think there was a good monster rather than a good fairy, for example?
Well, I think that was the basic idea. Remember, it was an idea suggested to the novelist, and then the novelist wrote the screenplay. A fairy would just be too simple. I mean, how could a fairy give tough? Fairies don't give tough love. You know, fairies give sweet love.
If I may, I think that one of the first lesson, the first story, was about that things are not people or individuals, even monsters, are not as they might appear. That underneath they are other. That was one of the lessons.
Yeah,
he really wasn't a bad monster. He was a good monster.
Tell us how you got that out of the first story.
How I got it?
Yeah. How did the film tell you about that lesson? How did it teach the boy?
The monster did. He told him. I'm trying to think. There were. There was a story, and there
First story, Frank. You brought up the first story about the good king.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
You want to do it? Narrate that for us.
I'm trying to recollect now. I just remember that there was the story, and it proved that people are not sometimes as they appear. And I don't.
Okay, that was the moral, right? Yeah.
Risa would like to speak, and then Steve, and then Brad.
I just want to answer your first question. I gave you more credit than that because I thought it was Pirkei Avot.
Wisdom of the fathers. And what does that mean? What does it mean to you, Risa?
Well, because it's how to deal with grief and how to deal with one another and honesty with one another and honest to be honest with the person who's ill and to tell the truth to all the people around,
Mhm.
and to have faith.
For those who may not be as familiar with Pirkei Avot as you are, could you fill them in on why that brought you?
So it's the same with the fathers, the ancestors, whatever. And it's their little poignant statements that tell you, always tell a bride she's beautiful, that kind of thing. Little simple, straightforward values of Judaism. And that was all through this thing.
Yeah, when was that assembled into a text?
Oh,
You know,
what you said, when was it assembled?
assembled into a text.
Into,
Is that ancient or medieval or? is it-
first of all, I'm not good at that, but it's quote, the rabbis. So-
Okay, those guys. So it goes way back.
oh yeah, it's way back. Oh yeah, Pirkei Avot is way back.
This is like Brindle, was it Brindle brief in the foreword? The little exchanges that immigrants had with each other and an Ann Landers type figure in the newspaper advising them on life. Ann Landers, who was Jewish along with her sister, dear Abby. Okay, well, thank you, Risa. To me, it resonated as something very Jewish, but not Jewish. It's just so human. And having lost, members of my family, I get it. I've been there. We all have. Look at the age of all of us. We've all been there, and painfully so. And to see this little boy go through what we have all experienced, I think is a powerful premise for a film. Just powerful.
So we have a bunch of people who would like to speak.
Okay, I'll shut up.
Steve, Brad, Roz Rabo.
Yeah, just briefly, maybe I got it wrong, but I thought there was an association between the monster and the yew tree that was the healing tree that
That's-
was in the second story. No?
Yeah, you're right. You're not wrong. That's exactly right. Okay, I'm going to admit, just excuse me, Steve. Hannah, I'm going to admit somebody under my name. So Steve, that's just another story, the healing tree. And we'll get to that soon. I wanted to take all the stories in
Yeah,
order.
I just meant that I thought that that's what the tree represented, or there was the yew tree come to life who was trying to heal him.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that's the Uber metaphor that he's there to heal the boy, not the mom. And the tree even says that. And that's the whole lesson, that the boy doesn't realize he needs healing. He's hurting terribly, but he doesn't see it that way until these stories help him through. And we'll come back to this notion of things can be two things at the same time. It's hard for humans to keep competing ideas in their heads.
So
But
Brad
somehow-
and then Roz Rabo.
Well, Jim, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. But first, I wanted to just refresh Frank's memory about the things are not what they seem. In that first episode, remember the king dies, and everybody suspects that it's the wicked stepmother who has poisoned the king, and in fact, it's the wonderful, handsome son who everybody adores, who seems to be the culprit. But Jim, as to the magical realism, to me, the magic in this movie is what we all experience, and you referred to it a minute ago, and that's this idea of cognitive dissonance, where we can have two conflicting ideas in our head at the same time. And that is magical. And in this case, this boy, on the one hand, he obviously wanted his mother to live. And on the other hand, he just wanted it to be over. And living with those two conflicting views at the same time is, that's life. But
crazy fun, yeah.
It is a magical thing that humans can do that.
Okay, now let me play devil's advocate, Brad. We have many contemporary examples of people not being able to contain two competing ideas in their head at the same time. Where do you think that's from? Is it just that's how we are? Some of us can do it and some can't, or can it be taught?
Oh, wow. That's way beyond my pay grade.
No, excuse me for referring to Torah study, but half of you are in that group. Last week, Rabbi Davids talked about, was that challenge, what does a teacher do who's teaching evolution? And some fundamentalist boy stands up in the class and says, this is not what I'm taught at home or in church. And Stan said, I would not participate in that discussion. I just say you have to talk to your parents about that. There is a middle ground, I believe, and we don't have to get political tonight, but it's so much a part of where we are stuck intellectually, if you'll let me go on for just a minute. What you have to do is to explain to the student in the school that both ideas, there is room in one head for both ideas. There has been a 1950s book written about religion being science being a mechanistic explanation of the universe, and religion being a causal relation, right? And if you express them not as competing terms, a zero-sum game, where one's right and one's wrong, but you say, oh, they can coexist, then the religionist, the believer, can comfortably say, God caused the neutrons and the protons to glom together in the nucleus and the electrons to spin. And that's okay. But if you take the science to one end, you come out with the vaccines are safe. If you take the religion to the other end, or paranoia, political paranoia, you come out with anti-vaxxers, anti-masking. To me, it's heartbreaking, having been a young man during the Vietnam War, to see this nation tear itself apart, because it was either right or wrong. It was the commies or the long-haired hippies who were going to tear us apart. And being one of the latter, it said, you don't understand us, you old geezers. Now that we're old geezers, think back on that time when we were so divided. I know Steve Greenberg and I went to college together, and we saw plenty of the division back in 1969 and 70, didn't we, Steve?
Did. But to me, the whole point of learning is to be able to consider different ideas and weigh them and evaluate them for yourself, not just accept what your parents say or what your teachers say.
But when you're 10 years old, it's really hard to apply that discipline to yourself when your mother's dying in front of you and everybody says she's going to get better.
Sure. Yeah.
It's Brad's cognitive dissonance. That's what makes the boy so torn, and what makes us feel for him so much. We know what's going to happen at the end, but we don't know how he's going to get through it.
Can I ask one other thing? Because it really bothered me at the end of the film. I could accept or understand that the boy wanted his mother's pain to be over, but not willing to see her die. But I think the monster tells him, you want your pain to end. And I had a hard time comprehending that in him.
What is it you had a hard time comprehending?
In the boy?
You don't understand. Do you not? Have you never had the experience?
Yeah. When my father died at the end, I wanted him to, I was disappointed every morning when I woke up and he was still alive.
Right.
And I could even if I was a child, I could have seen him suffering and wanted him to stop suffering. I don't think I ever would have felt so selfish to say, I want my father to die so my pain will be over. I would have, as long as he could take it, I could take it.
Well, I think you may be a nicer person than a lot of us, because I certainly
I don't think so.
it. I certainly have felt it all at the same time, that I adored somebody and I just couldn't bear it anymore. It was so difficult to be around, and that was not about for them. It was about for me.
Yeah.
And fortunately, the things I think did not actually create any action. And you can think whatever you want to. It didn't make somebody die. But when you're a little kid and you think it will.
Right. Remember, he's afraid of his own thoughts. I want it to be over, because he's so twisted. And part of it, what he wants to be over is, yes, her pain, but also the deception of his being left alone out in the dark with an angry grandmother who's just as torn by losing her daughter, and a separated father who cares very much about him and is reaching out but can't be embraced. And again, the idea is, I want it to be over and I don't want you to go, can exist in the same mind and heart at the same time. That's the best illustration of what we're talking about here. And it's easy to say, well, it's his point of view, but I think this comes from not to blame a 9-year-old or 10-year-old boy for what he feels, but when we see this in adults today, it's like this is a lack of discipline and education. They haven't been taught to examine their own feelings. And the function of the monster is look at yourself, break down your own nightmares. What are they about? You know, the nightmares will tell the story, and you're going to tell the fourth story. So,
Before you go on, I think Roz Rabo has been waiting a long time to say something.
Roz?
Unmute yourself. Good.
I wanted to go back to the monster. And at the end of the movie, when the grandma fixed the room up and they were looking through the books and there were pictures that he and his mother did, or his mother.
Is a mother's book, yeah.
Yeah, of the monster. And I thought maybe that's where he went, thinking about the monster that they did together, and the monster might help him. I don't know.
Well,
It's just a thought.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. It's the end of the movie, and we'll break our dietary laws and talk about that now.
Well, it was before too.
The book was the mother's book. Her name was on the album cover. And if you looked at all the images, I actually wrote them down. They start out with Gulliver being tied to the ground, right? But it was a woman. Moby Dick the whale, a spider, and then King Kong. Well, King Kong was a movie they watched together.
Right.
Okay, so the other things could have been references to the movies they saw together, or movies that the mother saw when she was a child and did those drawings. And then it comes to the queen, and it's the same evil queen, semi-evil queen. You know, her spires coming out of her head in front of a steeple, and dragons, and it calls back that first story. And then the prince and his bride are shown. So it's like all the monster stories are revealed by drawings the mother did in her book.
Mm-hmm.
And then the tree is also pictured there. The apothecary and the pastor are in the book, right? And then there's a picture of a young girl, and there's an eye on her apron or the front of her clothing. It was a little hard to read. And, you know, the book is what takes him through. It's like a deep connection with his mother. This, in a way, is its own magical realism, because how could he have dreamt all this? He never saw the book before in his life. He barely knew she was an artist. No, Risa, you don't think so? You think he saw the book before?
Yes.
Because that's
Prove
what into his dreams. She worked with him on art.
Yes.
So I don't know exactly when she put that book together, but I'm sure that she drew with him. I don't think he drew the tree for the first time when we see the drawing, and I think he saw it.
You're entitled to your opinion, and who knows? I have no, you know, neither one of us can prove, you know, that she drew them on her own or she drew them with him, and he didn't remember drawing them with her, and that's why he dreamt them. It's possible that that would actually be more logical. But again, the film is so fantastical. I said, wow, he's just, you know, in a way, you're right. But what touched me so much about the end, this is like eating lobster. He looks at the last image, kosher, remember, and this is the non-kosher part of the discussion because we're starting at the end. He lifts his eyes up to the light. And oh my God, what an image that is. In a way, it's universal, but it comes like relief, the light, you know, he sees a way out of this darkness. And it could be that the book is a way of reminding him of what they shared, that those images in his dreams were hers. So I could see why you saw it that way. You're a better viewer than I am. But the ultimate, you know, again, this happens all the time in our discussions. Two people see something that a different way, but they see the result the same way. They feel the result the same way. And I found it very uplifting and a little bit tearful. So we're done. Thanks for watching. Frank?
Frank's not done.
Oh, you're muted, Frank.
Yeah, I am not now. I wanted to bring up something that I thought was remarkable. The grandmother originally was pictured when you first meet her as someone very stern, very rigid, and whatever, and not a pleasing character. When halfway through, and the boy reacts emotionally and destroys her most valuable possessions,
Right.
the clock, and among other things. The grandmother's reaction was extraordinary. She just left the room, no demonstration of feelings and whatever. And she turns into a very supportive character when the mother actually dies, or in her last days. That seemed
That's the story. That's
remarkable.
one of the stories, that the evil queen is not necessarily evil. And there's a story about anger. I just want to say something about she does nothing. Happens 3 times in the movie. He says to his dad, "So you're not going to punish me?" And he said, "What good would that do?"
Yes, there.
And he says to the principal in the school after he beats up the bully, "You're not going to punish me?" "No, I wouldn't be a good teacher if I did." So this is like another befuddling thing for him, where, wait, I did something that you say is wrong, yet you're not punishing me. So what, does that make it right?
Jim, I
And-
think the words were, "What good would that do?"
What good would that do? Well, okay.
Same idea.
So, yeah. So it's like, again, he can't see the middle ground. Immediately, sure, a punishment might be merited. But if I really care about your long-term education, if I care about your growth, getting past this tough time in your life, I'm not going to punish you. I know it came out of anger. You know, it's one of those stages. It's like the stages of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, only it's pre-grief, you know, denial, acceptance, anger, resignation. I forget what all 5 are. This is a major point in the film, that there are adults in his life that try to help him. They're just not quite as effective as the monster, but they're saying the right thing. In terms of the grandmother, Sigourney Weaver was just wonderful in this. I mean, that's a story in itself, how she's stern and authoritarian, but she's rushing him back to the hospital. And she says, you know, you and I aren't likely buddies. And he agrees. And she said, but we share one thing in common, your mother. You know, and that's a very touching scene. And then she turned, you know, our feelings towards her turn on that, and they embrace. If you can think back to Fisherman's Friend, which we saw and discussed a couple months ago, these are the changes in relations that have nothing to do with action, but in realizations between characters that matter, you know, matter to Fisherman's Friend and matter to this film a great deal. In a way, if you just read the script of this without any of the descriptions of the transformations, you'd say, oh, that's just philosophical yammering, you know. But I think one of the great aesthetic accomplishments of the film is that J.A. Bayona, who's a Spaniard, if you read the credits, you see all these Spanish names and credits there, is able to take images and illustrate these points. Now, granted, he had a lot of animation in it for each of the stories, so that's free form. You know, you can do anything you want with that. So that was helpful. But I think the graphic design and the whole visual layout of the film and the effects of the tree unfolding, it's just brilliant. The visuals in this film, if you turn the sound off and just watch the pictures, there wouldn't be a bad one in them. They're all gorgeous. And there's something I noticed while I'm on my rant here. Why, I'll ask this question of all of us. Why, what were your feelings towards the monster, and did they change? When did you warm?
May I say Liam Neeson was stupendous, brilliant. Oh my God, such a character, such a great actor, such a narrator. And the story that and the lessons he tried to teach this child is phenomenal.
But the question is, how did your feelings change about the monster, or were you won over with the first story after the appearance and the
Won over
explanation?
with the first story. I just
Steve
won over.
nodding his head. Did you welcome the monster? You know, the boy manages to summon him by the end. He comes unannounced other times, but aren't we always looking for another appearance from Liam Neeson? Did anybody feel that way?
He was the therapist.
He was a therapist. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. I in my blurb describing the film, it's like these are very intimate conversations. given, stimulated by a knowing adult who knows not to tell the kid what he's feeling, but to lead him to what he's feeling and to help it come from the kid himself. You know, he's always saying, look at yourself, take a look at your dream. What are you saying? As a mediator, Fern, I'm sure that you're familiar with the skill.
Well, I am, but I'm actually personally familiar with it, that my children's father died when my children were extremely young. And I sat with them every night for years and talked as the tree or the monster and talked about the feelings. And in watching it, I remembered how significant it was to be able to talk about it and to say what was happening and how you felt. And without that, I think that, and now my children are grown and have children of their own. And for them, the ability to talk about what was happening, to verbalize it, to say all the things they felt were extraordinarily significant in having them grow up to be healthy adults. And this film beautifully captured it.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question you don't have to answer. Your children as adults now, do they ever review that time with you?
Yes. Yes, it's it's a very significant piece of their lives, that every night they could talk about what it felt like and it wasn't trapped. And, you know, children don't process grief the way adults do. They're grief stricken and then they go play and then they don't want to talk about it. And then they're grief stricken and then they don't want to talk about it. And then they behave badly and they don't tell you why. So it's a non-linear journey for children.
Well, sounds like you did a lot of teaching how to be a parent to them that they've carried forward with their own kids. Anybody else have a similar experience?
Carol.
No, I have not had that similar experience, but
Good
I
for
was
you.
wondering if anyone else noticed the appearance at least twice of the family photo where Liam Neeson is the grandfather.
Yeah. That's
And I thought that was an homage from the director.
Yeah, it was, exactly. Nobody noticed it but you, me, and the director and his mother, but
Yeah,
it was there twice and it's charming, and you can
it
do
was
that.
charming.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Jim, thinking of the supportive people or whatever, I'd like to discuss the father's role a little and his enticement, to which the boy seems positive. He wanted to not only visit on Christmas, which was the invitation extended, he wanted to move and stay with his father. But you would think that would produce, again, another tug and pull. He isn't shown explicitly that he's torn between wanting to be with his father and another life and leaving his mother, dying as she is.
Well, I think that's sort of the unspoken truth that he knows she's going to die and he's going to have to go live with somebody and he doesn't want to be his grandmother. But when he finds out he's going to have to share a small house with the stepsister, he doesn't want it.
I don't think that's what happened.
No?
I don't think his father wanted him.
Yeah.
He said it over and over. He kept saying, I want to come. And the father said, no, the house is too small. And I want to come. No, I'm busy. He didn't want him. He dumped him. He was awful.
Yes, you're right. Yet, it's, nobody's perfect. What can I say?
Well, the dad was far from
failed.
perfect.
The dad failed. But remember, the separation happened 7+ years before this. And he remarried and had a new child, and the dad couldn't be that person for him.
No, he dumped him a long time ago.
Well, yeah, the boy was probably 2 years old or 3 years old when he left.
Yeah, but people get divorced and they still have relationships. Arlene.
Well, he didn't. He didn't.
Yeah. Arlene.
Yeah, earlier, Jim, you asked about your feelings about the monster.
Yeah.
And when the film first started, I turned to Art and I said, I don't like this kind of movie. I don't like horror things. I like murder mysteries, but not something terrible or horrible. But then gradually, the remarkable part of the film was how the artists involved transformed this pile of wood into a human, where you can see the expressions on its face, on its eyes, its mouth. And when it became much more human rather than just a monster, it became somebody that I really admired and liked as he was teaching the boy.
Yeah, that's what I was after. I kept watching the monster's eyes and the close-ups and his lips and the way he moved his head in to be close.
Yeah.
Now, often in animated films, when the voices are always recorded in advance. Okay, and then and often what they'll do, they started doing this, I think, in the 90s. They videotape the performer in the sound recording booth voicing the words, because they're performing there, they're feeling it. And then they take that videotape and they use that as a guide to draw the expressions in the animated character.
Oh.
Sometimes it's literal, and I don't know, I could see Liam Neeson, doing all those facial expressions, and they were very complex.
Yes.
When he said something really important, the eyes would grow a little bit, just a little, Whereas if we're a horror film like You and I Hate, they grow big. It's like it was human scaled, even though he was, 4 times the height of the boy.
Yeah.
I thought that was just brilliant. The way the attention to detail, the fire behind the bark, the fire in the mouth, and the way they used it as a transitional device. We can talk about the transitions later, but I thought it was masterful. And without animation design and execution that fine, it would have flopped. It had to be just great, and it was. So,
Mitch, tell me your name, please.
Sherry.
Sherry, thank you.
Yes.
Sherry.
Thank you. I think that the monster became more human because the boy learned that monster was him, within him, and he was gaining that knowledge. And his story, the boy's story is that I don't want my mother to die, but I want the pain to stop. And all of his nightmares were about the hand leaving go of his mother's hand, meaning that his mother would die. And at the very end, when he's looking at his mother's drawing, the last page was that little mother type, that little person sitting on the
shoulder.
tree. So there, the two of them have become, his mother will never leave him, and the tree becomes him,
Right.
so that it all becomes one. So the tree would have to take on a human context. But I thought all of the art that was done, and I'm an art therapist, by the way, so I enjoyed this on multiple levels. But all of the artwork, the animation that was done was wonderful.
It really was. Now,
Brad?
Yeah, Fern, I just wanted to say how touched I was by what you had to say about your experience, because I think it really, there's a word we haven't used yet, in talking about this movie, and that's the guilt that this boy was feeling by having that reaction of just wanting it to be over. And it's not until he was able to verbalize that guilt, to admit that guilt, to admit those feelings to himself, that he was able to, that his therapist, the tree, could see a path forward for him to recovery. So, and you, Fern, you told us your life story, which is the same, apparently the same message here. How important it is to talk about those feelings, and rather than just burying them inside oneself.
Thank you.
I'd like to add something if nobody else has. I think Roz is raising her hand.
No, I don't think so.
She was waving, going to the right side of her screen to try and unmute. Did you want to say something, Roz?
No.
All right. Okay. This scene, this whole movie, reminded me of a film probably many of us saw many years ago, Ordinary People.
Oh,
And it's about the boy's grief because his brother died in a boating accident. And it comes to a climax when he's with his therapist and they do role playing. And Tim Hutton gets all his anger out because they were holding each other's arms across the bottom of the rowboat that had capsized in a storm. And he's saying, "Why did you let go? Why did you let go?" And Judd Hirsch, the therapist, says, "Because I got tired." And that was the breakthrough moment. He just collapses in a puddle of tears. He was crying already. And suddenly they took it to its final resting place, excuse the pun. You couldn't go any further with it. He reached that point of acceptance by admitting his anger. He was angry at his brother. Now that anger wasn't a big part of the movie. It was about the oppressive mother by what's her name? Who passed away? Mary Tyler Moore.
Tyler Moore.
Probably the best role she ever had. It was about her. She played the Sigourney Weaver role, but she never, I don't think she ever redeemed herself in that film. But these are great breakthrough moments. A great breakthrough moment, and we've seen it in other films. That just came to my mind. I'm sure there are many others.
It just seems to me also that the whole nation of Israel, and certainly most Holocaust survivors, suffered from survivor's guilt. And it was very difficult. It was an effort of will not to drown in feeling guilty about being happy that you survived. And
right. Well, it's how do you resolve your own feelings with your feelings for the lost person? It's like, I want this to end, but I don't want to let you go. It's a conflict, but it's not. It's two sides of the same. Steve, give us a moment. Sides of the same issue. The love that you have for that person hurts. So it's not just heal my mom, it's heal me because I'm hurting along with her. And that's what's driving me to say, I want to let her go, but I feel so guilty about wanting to let her go because he's only looking at one side of it. He wants to let her go because he loves her and because he's hurting. Yeah. And it's too much to deal with in one little brain, let alone an adult brain. I think Steve had a comment, Steve Greenberg.
I was also reminded of Ordinary People. And when you mentioned Mary Tyler Moore's performance, I wanted to just mention Alvin Sargent's screenplay that won the Oscar described her as being as cold and well organized as her refrigerator.
Oh, very cute. That was the role for sure.
Right.
Natalie, unmute yourself.
I think my opinion is going to be very different from all the other people who spoke, but the theme of this movie and the beauty of the acting with all the different actors and what was happening, it was so touching and beautifully done that monster coming on the screen sort of reminded me of King Kong or some of these other movies that are made for a entirely different purpose of children watching it, young people watching it. You see this monster. By the time the end of the film came to me, I was sorry to have actually had the vision of this monster. It bothered me a lot. I think that in Ordinary People, it may have been a similar kind of...
What bothered you about it?
It just looked like it was that it was put on there to make a statement, that it would be a different kind of film, that people would kind of think, oh my God, what is this? I didn't think it belonged there. I thought with the psychiatrist or some other way that you could have gotten the same exact theme, the same whole thing about if you don't believe in if the truth and the belief of what really happened is not in your brain, you cannot get the cure. That little boy. The other thing is, how good would have been, the mother was dying for months there, if he knew that she was going to die at the beginning. When we're all saying it was wonderful that he should realize that she was going to die at the end, there was still hope in all that time. Those were the two things I objected to in this film.
Okay. There
So-
may have been hope, but he has a little speech about hope.
Well, that wasn't the point of the film. Let's get back to the monster. That monster, by the end of the film, I thought took over what was really happening there for me as I perceived the film.
Okay.
Let
me play
I
devil's
just
advocate.
wonder if you might see it like Grimm's fairy tales. You know, I asked the question at the beginning, why was it a monster, not a good fairy? And our unconscious is not so beautiful as a good fairy. Our unconscious is dark and deep and convoluted and beautiful and all of those things wrapped up. And having the monster be that is kind of like a battle with one's own insides.
Well,
And that's why I thought it was a monster.
You liked it.
And then Risa?
It was putting us through the same conflict that the boy was going through. Good or bad? Was it upsetting, or can you fall in love with the monster? Which way is it going to be? And I think, Natalie, that's what you were fighting with yourself about.
No, I wasn't. I thought the whole idea of having this monster was like King Kong or other movies where you
Excuse
see
me,
the
Natalie, let me disagree with you something.
I don't want to. You can disagree with me. You asked me what I thought. That's what I thought.
You're entitled to your opinion, but let me say, in the movie King Kong, which I have seen twice, although not recently, King Kong is the sweetheart. He is the innocent animal spirit who is enamored and in love with this frail blonde woman. And the rest of the world doesn't understand what a sweetheart he really is, and they drive him to his death. So here's that duality again. He looks like a monster, but he doesn't really behave like one towards her. Similarly, if imagine you were listening to this and seeing everything but the monster, can't you judge the monster by his actions and the effect of his actions on the boy? So I'm playing devil's advocate here. Isn't the monster an agent of good?
Of course, this whole idea could still have been in the film, like it was portrayed in ordinary people, with a psychiatrist, with a friend, with whoever you want to put in.
Well, that would be ordinary people, and it chose not to be. I mean, it's like
all right, okay.
These are the terms of the film, so you can't say the whole. It's like you have to accept it or not, and if you didn't like it, that's totally fine. But as long as you understand that the monster did good to the boy, then they were somewhat successful. And again, it's going back to people are more than what they look like. They do more than we think. It requires a deeper understanding.
Jim, we
Hold
have
on, Frank. Hold on, Frank. Mitch has his hands up, and then Frank.
Okay, fine.
Mitch, go ahead.
I was curious whether Liam Neeson and the boy did their shooting in the same room in the studio, and then the special effects came into play. How they
probably never met. They probably never met. Generally, the director of the audio recording session, which in this case I think was the director,
I don't want to hear that, Jim.
Well, they weren't in the same room to call a special effect. They didn't record together.
I want a second opinion, Jim.
Okay.
Strange, you'll never meet.
Yeah. But it's remarkable, isn't it? I mean, this is part of the magic of movies. We can make it feel like they are right face to face. And I'm sorry, Mitch, your companion's first name there?
Sherry.
Gary. So as an art therapist, you know how images bring people together and heal them internally as well as with each other. And that's one of the things I love about film, is that it's this remarkable, there's no other expression like it. There are other profound ways to express thoughts and feelings. I'm not saying it's alone, but this is uniquely cinematic and totally fooled us all, and we were willing to let it do that.
So we have three people who want to speak in this order: Frank, Brad, and Barbara.
All right, I was just going to say, when we're talking about why a monster, if you're going to have a story about messages coming through nightmares, you don't have nightmares about fairies. We have nightmares about dark, awful, ugly monsters and things of that sort. It is true, it could be done otherwise, but that's a different story. You know,
Yeah.
they
Right,
chose.
it's just a different story, and you have to let the filmmaker run with it their way. Who else was there?
Brad, and then Barbara.
The presence of the monster, of course, evokes a whole fairy tale history genre. And, if you study fairy tales, as Bruno Bettelheim has done, he's a psychologist coming out of the University of Chicago, I believe.
And tell us what he was famous for.
He's very famous for his study of fairy tales.
And
he also has somewhat of a checkered background himself, but with the fairy tales, if you have read fairy tales, they're not Disney. There are horrible things that go on in fairy tales. There's incest, there's fratricide, patricide, matricide.
Sounds like the Bible.
And these were directed at children. And the idea is that according to Bettelheim, is that this is a way for children to work through their issues. So my question is, who are the people today here in this group that have seen this movie? We're all adults. What about, should this movie be shown to a child, especially a child who is going through the type of situation that this child has gone through? Would that be appropriate? What do you think? Bruno Bettelheim, I think, would say yes.
Jung would say yes, but he wasn't a child psychologist.
I would say, how old is a child?
Yeah. The film is rated PG-13, which means parental guidance suggested 13 and over. So it's middle school, could probably handle it. Again, it's children or of the same age as the boy. And remember, the opening lines of narration are, he was no longer a boy and not yet a man.
Right.
Where does the story begin? It begins with stories.
Right. Barbara?
I don't think the answer to your question.
Barbara, lean in, please. We can't hear you.
In terms of what Brad just said, I think it would depend upon how the child is, where the child had evolved to, but that's not why I raised my hand. I felt the way Arlene felt. I resisted it. I was very uncomfortable. It's not a genre I like. And I was mesmerized by how the entire movie pulled me in and pulled me through this experience in a way that was unique and told the story in such a unique way. And it was from resistance. I resisted it. I felt like, Arlene, why am I watching this? I hate this genre. And yet it just opened up a whole pathway of thinking and feeling that I thought was remarkable. And the brilliance of the person who devised this movie, it was really remarkable for me.
Are we all aware that it's based on a book?
Yeah.
This was a book.
It was an idea that the author didn't have, but was suggested by somebody else. And then he wrote the novel.
Right.
And then he wrote the screenplay.
It was a children's book.
It was?
It was a children's book. It was very top medal winning, according to what I read.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Very popular children's book, which was very sophisticated children's book, if you ask me. It was for teenage children.
There's a children's version, I suppose, of that somewhat, which is Where the Wild Things Are.
Yes. And didn't the drawings look a lot like Maurice Sendak's drawings?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Really remarkable.
It's one of those books that I would give to a child who had just come through a death of someone that he or she loved. And they would accept it at their own level, probably more easily than in the visualization with the movie. But the book, I'm sure, would go in that category of the books that Stanley and I routinely recommend to parents whose kids have been affected by a death.
And you could see how a book being words on a page would allow the child to imagine a monster as scary or not as scary as they could tolerate. So there's a limiting thing in that. Movie can just throw an image at you and scare you, but your imagination would act as a governor on how bad it got so that you could continue reading it.
Well, the advantage of the book is you could turn the page.
Yeah, you could look away is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just so interesting. I'm glad we're having this discussion because, I was a little worried. It just, to me, it just resonated with me so much and knocked me out every time I watch it.
Howard, if you want to unmute.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing, I didn't find this out until I read about the movie after watching it. It got a very good critical review, both by movie critics and the general audience. But it was really a failure in the box office in the United States. It went down, it was $800,000 one week and then $400,000 the next week, and then they pulled it.
Well, I'll tell
Why
you.
would that be?
Well,
we're not a
I have
very
ideas.
deep
That's a good
thinking
question.
country, in case you haven't noticed lately.
What did you say, Ferna? What?
It seems like we're not that deep thinking a country.
Well, there's another reason, Howard. It really wasn't made for American sensibilities. In reading the credits, there was a ton of foreign money, a lot of Spanish money as well in this movie. I think it was made for a world audience, which generally, tee off on what Fern said, has an easier time of finessing ideas and considering more than only ideas that agree to them. There's an open-mindedness, a worldliness, to other cultures that we seem to be lacking. And I think that's why the financiers were more comfortable making it. The director made, after this, he made The Impossibles, I mentioned, about a family who's separated because of a tidal wave on some tropical island.
Is this the same director?
Yes.
It's a remarkable film.
Okay, why? How can you compare them?
Oh, it's a film about a family that is struck by a total catastrophe of massive proportions. I mean, not just losing family, but in a cataclysmic tsunami, and the family is separated, and the children learn how to cope with what has happened. And it's just a beautiful movie, a really exquisite movie.
There's devastation all around them. Theirs is not the only family that was torn apart.
They learn how to be decent human beings and how to care for others and how to carry on in the face of catastrophe. And Naomi Watts, she was magnificent. It was a beautiful movie.
So I think that says something about Bayona's sensibility and his sensitivity. He sees really deep into the family dynamics and the emotions. Unfortunately, he's now making action movies. Now, maybe Steve Greenberg can tell me more about what he's done lately, but he's doing much bigger budget pictures. This was not a cheap movie, but compared to a Transformers movie, this is a tiny budget. This was, I don't know. We can look it up. Maybe Steve can do that later. But do you know
$40 million.
40 million?
That's what I read, yeah.
Yeah, and the Transformers and Avengers movies are 150 million to $200 million. A lot bigger gamble. So they want to make sure they get to an established audience for that kind of movie. Who's the established audience for this movie? Just sensitive parents and grandparents like us? Well, there are far fewer of them. right? And they're less established moviegoers. I think, Howard, that one of the problems was the title. It just was people like us. I don't like horror movies either. You know, I like films that scare the hell out of me, but not that way. You know, I like profound psychological stuff and dramas that just slay me. So it's, I want real pain. I don't want fake pain. You know, I don't want to jump out of my chair because of a loud sound. I want to jump out of my chair because I don't want the bad guy to slash somebody whom I care about. You know, it's the motivations are all different. And this film establishes empathy with the boy right away with the first bullying. First, his mother's sick. He has to wash his own clothes and make his own toast and go off to school and face bullies. You know, it's like this kid's alone. And you feel for him right away. Plus, he's an amazing actor. I mean, this we'll see what happens with his career. Anybody else want to chime in? Are we really all done? Let me point out some of my favorite moments. There's some lovely moments. The mother, what's her name again? I'm blanking.
Sigourney Weaver.
Jones. No, the dying mother, Felicity Jones. Okay, remember she falls. That was a bit of a fake moment when Connor is arguing in the kitchen. They hear a thud. They run into the living room and she's on the floor and she needs her medicine, right? Her pain medicine. And she, you know, it's a sloppy slurp off a spoon and Sigourney Weaver embraces her. And then there's a shot of Felicity Jones's face. And in her pain, she looks up at her son. And that was such a beautiful moment because even through her pain, she's concerned about how is he reacting to this? How is he seeing this? This is a mother's love. My pain isn't important. His is. There's stuff like that all throughout the film that just, if you stop to look at it when it happens, you realize this is very precious. So that was one note I had. I wanted to call everybody's attention to.
I like that. I agree with you. That's a mother's sensitivity to her children not in pain.
Right.
Number one.
Right. Here's something really funny in the story of the king and his new wife. If you'll think back to the animation, I didn't notice this before. She's first shown to us as being made of ice. And then she turns into a shadow and she's giving the dying king a goblet of what we think is poison. So you see how it's manipulating us to think she's evil, right? You know, and supporting that visually. And then, of course, it overturns our expectations, our biases into revelation of what really happened. So facts matter, words matter, and you have to learn how to parse them and be a critical thinker. So I thought that was very clever. I mean, the film is just littered with moments like that.
But that wasn't really what happened. He really died of old age.
Old age, right. But the whole scene of her giving him a goblet, saying she poisoned him, was to twist our minds.
Twist us.
Intentional misinformation.
Yeah, it was well done.
And if you don't go back and hear the rest of the story, but that's all your database is made from, then you think that was an evil queen. You can't change my mind. She must have been a socialist, you know, or whatever. Excuse me if there are any socialist haters amongst us. I don't think so. I think we're all humanists. But you see, labels are terrible. That's the problem. You know, it's like nobody is an idea. When I see an example of horrible misogyny or racism or the veiled, or forget about horrible and evident, the veiled comments we get from anti-vaxxers. You know, one thing they're saying now is, oh, it's proof the vaccines don't work. They have to give a third shot.
Oh my God.
You can't argue with people like that. Ron DeSantis or Greg Abbott in Florida and Texas, they talk gobbledygook. You know, they twist every fact so it suits their need. And it's a horrible tendency. It's human. We've all done it. You know, we're all defensive. We're all protective of things we can't face. We're protecting ourselves.
Totally agree with you.
And it's a shame because if we were only shown how to do this as Fern showed her kids, oh, what a different world this would be. You know, it's education in the schools. Oh, so this is what I want to get back to. Excuse me, Risa. I don't have to write Stan now in an email. when Stan refused to talk to the religious fundamentalist kid about the Bible, and my family tells me, no, the evolution's wrong. My take on that situation is it's a teachable moment where you have to teach the kid how to allow the cat on your keyboard, but you also have to teach the kid how to see that there aren't two sides. The believers of either persuasion are not wrong and they're not evil. They're not contradictory. And that sets up the dissonance that Brad brought up. But I feel dissonance. It's black and white, isn't it? No, you have to be coached. You have to be shown example after example in our schools of this process of learning how to be a critical thinker and question premises and sort of respect yourself enough to say, wait, I have this unanswered question. I need it answered before I can move forward with an opinion. That's not a trained skill these days.
That's probably one of the reasons you asked, why American audiences don't like it. That in general, we have a population that likes simple stories with simple messages. And this is a very complicated story. And it says that life is not simple at all. Right. And there isn't a large audience for those who prefer a simpler story.
Right. The medicine goes down tough. But the visuals here, I think, made it easy because it's so seductive in terms of its visual appeal. But people, they don't read the reviews, like Howard does, or think about these things. They Monster Calls, sounds like a horror film. They don't even have to see the ad. It's a little boy standing underneath a giant tree. Steve?
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded us about the word monster, because we grew up with Godzilla and those cheesy, supposedly frightening monsters from the 1950s. Kids love monsters today. They think they're really cool. They like monsters. They're not frightened of them.
Yeah, it's like kids love dinosaurs.
Yeah.
All kids go through that phase, and they don't see them as monsters, even if they're carnivorous. They're exotic. They have special skills. These big things can fly, or they have long necks, or they, whatever the special skill. The Triceratops has a horn and a shield. It captures their imagination. And
Brad?
That's the power of story, Steve. I know you believe that.
Yeah, I mean, just Jim, from a cinema point of view, I think it's really interesting taking a book that was written for children and then turning it into a movie that is directed at adults. And I'm wondering if that maybe explains Natalie's discomfort with the movie. I wonder if there, if there's something there.
Thank you for saying that. You put it in much better words than when I spoke. That's exactly, you hit the point about the fairy tale aspect of the movie. For me, I loved the theme, I loved the acting, I loved that the whole everything about that film. But when that monster kept coming on the screen, by the time of the end of the film, it took away from me what Brad was saying in a much better way. It made it exactly, like this fairy tale kind of thing. Yeah, he said it better, but I agree with him, and I guess he agrees with me, so that's good.
No, it's not that we disagree with you. It's that we didn't feel your discomfort.
I don't care about disagreeing. It's not disagreeing or not. We're giving our opinion, now.
Howard
And
has
a comment on that.
That
was it. Yes.
Howard?
Something that another thing related I couldn't really understand, I don't totally understand, is how close the movie is to the book. I haven't read the book, but I did read the plot, a detailed plot, and they were both exactly the same 3 questions plus 1 question, and the U tree, and everything. It was a very close thing of a book that was popular. Now, maybe these children's books are really bought by adults.
Some are. No, I think what you're observing is the love of structure and how the structure of the story, the structure of the book is for three fairy tales, and one the fourth the boy has to tell himself. The overall structure is there are 4 ways you can deal with your roadblocks to accepting your mother's death. You know, so they're parallel, they're not mirror images, but they move along together. And it's a wonderful way to do it, because you can't change the order of the stories, because there's one about hating somebody and follows after a scene where he hates his grandmother. You know, so the story is addressing what has come before in the movie. Probably happened that way in the book too. So a tight structure, every writer, whether it's a novelist or a screenwriter or a kid's novelist, looks at the progress of the narrative. And it has to make not just total sense, but it has to flow. And beyond flowing, it has to force you forward with an irresistible momentum. You can't help it. The story pushes you along, makes you want to hear more, learn more, see more, feel more. It's engagement. And Steve, do you want to chime in on structure at all?
You know, I want to add something else. It just occurred to me. Somebody said yew tree again, and I realized, do you think there was does anyone think there might have been any kind of intentional pun there with Y-O-U tree?
No, the yew tree was the source of a breast cancer remedy that they discovered in the 90s. What's the name of the drug? It's very commonly described and very effective.
Something
Taxol.
Yeah.
Tamoxifen, yeah. And it was a real discovery, and I suspect the book was written around, you know, maybe it wasn't written in the 90s, but it was a very conscious choice, I felt.
Well, the author survived. I don't know if she survived. The author had breast cancer at the time.
Really? I thought the author was a man.
So the original, she wasn't the author, the original outline of the book, the whole thing was done by a woman who had terminal breast cancer and died before she could write the book.
Shaban was her name.
This other guy was also a children's book author. They were both children's book authors.
I see. Okay. Fascinating stuff.
I read. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Howard. Back to the yew tree. Did anybody notice the moss growing in between the layers of bark on his face? It was like, I was so drawn into it. It was just so real. Even that was embellished, you know, subtly though. You know, it was just, I mean, you did. Okay, good. We're together on that. It just shows you the care that these artists and animators go to be super real and to bind you to the screen. It's all about the viewer, and that's a great example of it. And even if you didn't see it, you may have felt it.
Mr. Ruxin, may I say that with special effects and vocal background and music background and everything that interplays with film, which I'm an amateur, you know a lot more than I do. I am learning. I love listening to what your narrative abilities and your professionalism. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for your kind words. I hope I can continue to deserve it. But this is my passion. I mean, and Steve's too. It's what drew us into filmmaking, what we always wanted to do. And regardless of where our careers took us, we are still who we are, and our passions are just as genuine now. If anything, I'm more passionate about film than I was in college when I knew so little about it. You know, I started out just going to the movies, and then in college I began writing about them. Steve actually was a programmer for the Film Society, where I saw 1 or 2 films every week, in addition to the local theater. And it's really how I spent my first all my 4 years of college was going to movies. I didn't know it. I was just a kind of a miserable, unhappy English major until, well, first I was a chemistry major and then English.
Wow. May I ask you a question, sir? Is there a prayer for people who are in the arts that are learning? Because I'm getting the audition for Mr. Spielberg's cousin, and I don't even know anything except for how to play piano. But is there a special prayer that everyone can pray for me, that I would just make Wilshire Boulevard Temple proud and get a chance?
Well, make yourself proud first, but Risa, she's our scriptural expert here, by ex officio. I don't know of any, but look, there's a prayer for everything, and
Okay, all right.
clergy
Thank you.
clergy always make up their own. It's
All
a,
right.
it's about sincerity.
Right,
And
I
we
was
do
just gonna
wish
say,
the best.
write your own words that's burning inside you.
Yeah, that's
Oh, thank you, Risa.
good advice. So we have some time. Let me just share a few more moments because I'm such a fan of this film. Oh, the doors. Everybody's looking through cracks in doors or the keyhole. It was like, what does a door represent to us when it's not open all the way? A barrier, right? He couldn't bear to witness his mother in pain peeping into the bedroom. He's looking at his grandmother through the door. It's like it's withholding the boy from where he needs to go. So I thought this was a really apt metaphor. You know, in Dr. Zhivago, he's looking through windows all the time. God, I don't know what that meant there, but here it had a real function. It was totally in place. And the first couple of times I saw this, I didn't see it. And this time, because I was more familiar with the geography, I realized, oh my God, he's looking through a crack in the door again. So again, this is another one of those details that filmmakers build into it. And if you see it, fine. If you don't, it's also fine. Maybe it'll have an effect on you. I think we're talking about iconic imagery here. And I mentioned Jung, who was all about the indelible importance of images in our psyche, in our subconscious. And filmmakers do that as well. They hope it's penetrating our subconscious. They don't know, but they try. And this is an example of that, where it didn't matter if you saw it or not. But in summing up, now we can talk about the end of the movie. There's this concept of betrayal. You know, I want it to be over. And he feels he's betraying his mother by wanting it to be over, because that means she has to die. And that's where the guilt comes from. I did something wrong. I betrayed my mother. I meant, I
Jim,
wanted.
I just would like to share a brief true story that I think was the same kind of point of a parent loving, the mother loving her child so much she wanted him to be okay. I represented somebody who was divorced from his wife. They had children together and they were engaged in a really bitter custody fight. And that was over. And some years later, he became very wealthy and the mom was furious. Arlene actually represented the wife. You may not remember this. She wanted more, she wanted to get more money, support, and they started to battle again. And we went to war. And shortly into that exercise, my client, the dad, called me and said, the wife, his ex-wife, the mom of these children, has cancer and she's going to die. And I don't want to fight with her anymore. Just give her what she needs, find out what she needs, and I will give it to her. And he did. And he sent the kids to Europe with their mom for the summer, because it was probably the last trip they would have. And then she came home and she couldn't live on her own anymore. And they had a big guest house in the back, and she went to live in their guest house, and she went there to die. And he had a new wife and new children, and they all gathered around. And I went to visit her. And I asked her, how could you do that? I know you just hated him so much. How could you tolerate it doing this? And she said, I'm going to die. And these children need to know that it's okay to love their dad and his new wife. They need to have a good life. And if I don't do this, they won't. And it was an extraordinary, it became the movie Stepmom, actually. He lived next door to the person who wrote it, who no doubt took the real life story. But it was an example, as in this book, of somebody as a parent who says, I'm going to do what I can to make your life okay. The focus being on the kids being okay, really at the cost, the emotional cost to the mom. It was quite beautiful in that instance and very beautiful in this story.
Yeah.
it's unusual, or not unusual, but we see this often where approaching death kind of clarifies everything, you know.
For some people.
For some people, what's
Yeah.
really important, you know, and she saw beyond herself
Yes.
to her kid's future.
Yeah.
Somebody else had a comment? Okay. I'm so glad we had this discussion, and thank you all for sharing your personal experiences, especially you, you're an inspiration. I want to announce the next film, and this is going to sneak up on you too. So, oh, Natalie, this is for you.
Can I tell?
Hold on, LaDonna, please.
Okay.
This film is called The Man Who Sold His Skin.
Oh, no.
and I kind of didn't want to see it because I thought it was this silly film about piercings and tattooing. And it starts out being a criticism of the art world about a man who gives a famous artist the right to tattoo his back. And it's the right to photograph it. He owns the copyright to the tattoo. And it's a 10-year contract. And the man who gives his back is an Arabic man who seeks to marry a woman, and her family won't let him near her. And she actually goes with a more prosperous gentleman. And I think it ends up in France, where the ex-girlfriend is living. And it's all about the art world and the marketing of art, but it's a stand-in for the marketing of human beings. What is a human worth, and how do we dehumanize people? So it's not that far from being an emblem or a symbol of the Holocaust, if I have to bring it home to some of you. This is a real humanistic film about what's important, like this film was, in a different way. It turns out to be not weird and twisted and evil, although there's plenty of discomfort in it, although it's not graphic. It ends up being a very warm. What's funny about that, Risa?
No, I enjoyed it very much.
Oh, you saw it? Okay.
Yeah,
So
I saw it. I loved it.
Is as sweet as could be, right?
Yeah, I loved it.
Satisfying ending. I'm not going to tell you any more about it. It's a stunningly beautiful film, extremely well acted. I forget who directed it. Not an American. And I want to tell you what the tattoo is. I think it's a dollar bill, isn't it? It's currency. The tattoo on his back. Or
It's
it has
currents?
I don't even
remember that.
I'll see it again a couple times before our session. But this in very much is like Squid Game, for those of you who've seen it. It's about what money does to us. And the artist is holding up a mirror to society and the art world, saying, you see how you've cheapened yourselves, how all you do is chase after the money and the real value is somewhere else.
Jim, I think it was a Euro passport of some kind that allowed.
Oh, okay, okay.
Free
Even
movement.
better. The man becomes his passport, the number, right? So it's worse even than money. It's like, well, okay, thank you. So you saw it, Arthur, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a remarkable.
And we'll watch it again.
Yeah, okay, good, because it's bound to provoke a really good discussion, because we'll have lots of different opinions, and we won't have to tell each other you're wrong. It's but it takes us all down a path that ends up in a very comforting resolution that, you know, beauty and love and kindness is possible, even despite all the craven mercantile impulses in the world and how the media distorts everything. So that will be 2 weeks from tonight, I think. I believe it is. And it might be 3 weeks. That's the 13th, I believe, is the date. I'll send you a blurb on it. One thing, I always encourage people to share films with their grandchildren when appropriate. And if you feel this would be appropriate for your grandchildren to see, show it to them. And, you know, it'll probably provoke some really great reactions. They don't have to be my guinea pig, but if you do that, I'd love to hear about what the response is. Because, you know, it's like, I love all of us gray hairs or no hairs or colored hair people here. But it's like we really had hopes for this movie discussion group to be a broader demographic. And, you know, it'd be so good. Like Melissa's not with us tonight. You know, I don't know why. Melissa's our 35-year-old focus group of one. She's not Jewish, but she's a soulful person like us. And it would be fun to bring at least reactions that we can share of the films with younger people, if you can bring them into it.
Jim,
So that's just,
before we sign off, I would like to prevent the fiasco of the multiple Jim Ruxins.
yeah, that's my mea culpa, attorneys.
So you want to tell people how they need to come on next time?
Hannah can do that better than I.
I don't know.
Best to go to the website, WBT at home, and it's on the info at WBTLA.com. And find the Friday or Saturday listing along with my announcement, which will come in advance. And that's the proper group.
It will say register now.
Yes, right. And then they'll print a passport on your back and you'll be forever marked.
Thank you, Jim, for picking this. It was a beautiful movie.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Fern. Thank you, Jim.
Like it. Night. See you in 2 weeks.
Okay, see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye, everybody.